The bartender's warning. The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's bar like angry fists demanding entry. Inside, the warm glow of amber lights cast long shadows across worn wooden tables where regular customers nursed their drinks and shared quiet conversations. Behind the polished mahogany bar, Sarah wiped down glasses with practiced efficiency, her trained eyes constantly scanning the room. 23 years of bartending had taught her to read people like open books, and tonight something felt different. The door chimed as a man in an expensive charcoal suit entered, shaking droplets from his coat. Vincent Romano moved with the careful grace of someone who understood that every gesture mattered. His dark hair was slicked back perfectly, and his shoes clicked against the hardwood floor with authority. Sarah recognized him immediately from newspaper photos, though she pretended not to notice as he chose a corner booth with a clear view of both entrances. "Whiskey, neat," he said when she approached, his voice carrying the slight rasp of a man who had given many orders in his lifetime. Sarah nodded, returning with a crystal tumbler filled with their finest bourbon. She placed it before him along with a white cloth napkin, her movements smooth and professional. Vincent had been coming to Murphy's for 3 weeks now, always alone, always ordering the same drink. The other patrons gave him respectful distance, sensing the aura of danger that surrounded him like expensive cologne. Sarah knew his reputation preceded him everywhere he went. Vincent Romano wasn't just any customer, he was the head of one of the city's most powerful crime families. The establishment served as his unofficial office away from the scrutinized locations where federal agents might be watching. Here, among working-class folks and neighborhood regulars, he could conduct business without drawing unwanted attention. Sarah had witnessed several quiet meetings, men in suits approaching his table with briefcases and hushed conversations that lasted precisely 15 minutes. Tonight felt different though. Sarah noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour, its occupants clearly visible despite their attempts to remain inconspicuous. 2 men sat in the front seat, one occasionally speaking into what appeared to be a radio. Their professional posture and obvious surveillance techniques screamed federal law enforcement. As she continued her evening routine, Sarah kept one eye on the watchers and another on Vincent, who seemed completely unaware of the danger closing in around him. She had grown up in this neighborhood, where loyalty meant something and where you protected your own. Her father had taught her that some lines you never crossed, and betraying a customer's trust was one of them. The clock above the bar showed 9:30 when more vehicles began appearing on the street. Sarah's heart rate quickened as she recognized the coordinated positioning of what was clearly a federal operation preparing to move. She had seen enough police dramas to understand that Vincent Romano was about to become the center of a very public arrest. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a pen, quickly scrawling a message on a small piece of paper. The weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy coat. She wasn't protecting a criminal, she was honoring the unwritten code of her establishment and her community. Every person deserved a fair chance, regardless of their past choices. Vincent sat reading a newspaper, completely absorbed in the financial section while occasionally sipping his whiskey. His relaxed posture indicated he felt safe in this familiar environment, trusting in the routine that had served him well for weeks. Sarah approached his table with fresh napkins, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, replacing his used napkin with a clean one. Her voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Can I get you anything else?" Vincent looked up with mild interest, noting her professional demeanor. "No, thank you. The service here is always excellent." His eyes held a hint of warmth, the kind reserved for people who treated him with genuine respect rather than fear. Sarah returned to her station behind the bar, watching as Vincent absently reached for the fresh napkin. The seconds stretched like hours as she waited for him to discover her warning. She busied herself cleaning already spotless glasses, using the repetitive motion to calm her racing nerves. The moment arrived when Vincent unfolded the napkin to wipe condensation from his glass. His expression changed instantly from casual contentment to sharp alertness as he read the hastily written words, "They know you're here. Run." His eyes immediately found Sarah's across the room, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the street. Without appearing rushed, Vincent folded the napkin and placed it in his jacket pocket. He finished his drink in one smooth motion, left a generous tip on the table, and stood with the same measured grace with which he had entered. His years of experience in dangerous situations served him well as he walked toward the rear exit, maintaining the appearance of a customer simply leaving after an enjoyable evening. Sarah watched through the back window as Vincent disappeared into the alley behind the restaurant. Within minutes, the front door burst open as federal agents flooded into Murphy's bar, their weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. The regular customers sat frozen in their seats, confusion and fear written across their faces as they found themselves in the middle of what appeared to be a scene from an action movie. Vincent Romano. Federal agents. Nobody move. The lead agent's voice boomed through the suddenly silent establishment. His team quickly spread throughout the room, checking every corner and questioning every patron. Sarah continued wiping glasses, her expression carefully neutral as agents approached the bar. "Did you see Vincent Romano tonight?" the lead agent demanded, showing her a photograph that matched the man who had been sitting at table 7 just minutes earlier. Sarah studied the image with apparent concentration, as if trying to recall whether she had seen this person. "Maybe," she replied with practiced uncertainty. "We get a lot of customers." "What did he look like?" Her performance was flawless, the result of years of dealing with difficult situations in a neighborhood where cooperation with law enforcement wasn't always the preferred option. The agents spent the next hour searching the premises and interviewing customers, but their primary target had vanished completely. Sarah answered their questions with helpful vagueness, providing just enough cooperation to avoid suspicion while revealing nothing useful. She watched them examine the corner booth where Vincent had been sitting, looking for any evidence of his presence. One young agent picked up the empty whiskey glass, dusting it for fingerprints while his partner photographed the scene. They found nothing incriminating, just the normal traces of a customer who had enjoyed a drink and left. Sarah had cleared the table thoroughly after Vincent's departure, following her usual routine of maintaining cleanliness and order. As the federal team finally departed, clearly frustrated by their failed operation, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had made a choice that could have serious consequences, but something inside her insisted it had been the right decision. The unwritten rules of Murphy's Bar demanded loyalty to customers who showed respect, regardless of their other activities. The remaining patrons gradually returned to their conversations, though the atmosphere remained tense and subdued. Everyone understood they had witnessed something significant, but the neighborhood code of silence meant that details would never be discussed outside these walls. Sarah continued her shift as if nothing extraordinary had happened, serving drinks and making small talk while her mind processed the evening's events. Later that night, as she locked up the empty establishment, Sarah found herself wondering about Vincent Romano's fate. Had her warning provided enough time for him to escape the city? Would there be consequences for her actions? She understood that helping someone evade federal law enforcement could result in serious criminal charges, but the alternative had felt like a betrayal of everything her father had taught her about loyalty and honor. The neighborhood streets were quiet as Sarah walked to her car, her footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new conversations, and hopefully a return to the normal rhythm of life at Murphy's Bar. But tonight had changed something fundamental in her understanding of the choices ordinary people sometimes faced. Vincent Romano had disappeared into the urban landscape like smoke, leaving behind only questions and the memory of a brief encounter that had tested Sarah's principles. She had acted on instinct, guided by values that ran deeper than law or fear. Whether that decision would prove wise remained to be seen, but she felt no regret as she drove home through the empty streets. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under the streetlights. Sarah's shift was over, but her involvement in Vincent Romano's story was just beginning. Forces had been set in motion that would soon test her resolve and challenge everything she believed about loyalty, justice, and the price of doing what felt right in a complicated world. In the days that followed, Murphy's Bar would return to its usual routine of serving drinks and providing a safe haven for neighborhood residents. But Sarah would carry the memory of that rainy night when she had changed the course of events with nothing more than a few words written on a napkin. The weight of that decision would stay with her, a constant reminder that even small actions could have profound consequences. The federal investigation would continue, with agents returning periodically to ask new questions and follow fresh leads. Each time, Sarah would provide the same helpful cooperation that revealed nothing of value. She had learned to navigate the careful balance between truth and loyalty, understanding that sometimes silence served justice better than complete honesty. Vincent Romano had vanished completely, leaving no trace of his whereabouts or his plans. Some neighborhood residents whispered that he had fled the country, while others believed he was hiding somewhere in the city, planning his next move. Sarah preferred not to speculate, focusing instead on the certainty that she had given him a chance to make his own choice about his future. The corner booth where Vincent had sat remained empty for several weeks, as if other customers instinctively understood its significance. Sarah would clean the table each night with special care, remembering the moment when a simple gesture had altered the trajectory of multiple lives. The napkin had been discarded, but its message continued to resonate through the complex web of consequences that followed. Murphy's Bar stood as a monument to the neighborhood values that had shaped Sarah's decision. In a world where loyalty often conflicted with law, where right and wrong weren't always clearly defined, the establishment represented a place where human dignity took precedence over official duty. Sarah had upheld that tradition, regardless of the personal cost. #The consequences unfold. 3 months passed before Vincent Romano returned to Murphy's Bar, and when he did, Sarah almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the expensive suit and polished appearance. Instead, a man with graying hair and worn clothing sat at the same corner booth, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who had lived through significant hardship. Only his distinctive hands, with their manicured nails and subtle scars, revealed his true identity. Sarah approached cautiously, her heart racing as memories of that rainy night came flooding back. She had wondered countless times whether her warning had been enough, whether Vincent had escaped safely, and what consequences might follow. Now, seeing him alive but clearly changed, she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension about what his return might mean. "Whiskey, neat?" she asked quietly, using their familiar routine to acknowledge his presence without drawing attention from other customers. Vincent looked up, and for a moment, his weathered face softened with what might have been gratitude or recognition of shared secrets. "Please," he replied, his voice rougher than before, carrying traces of exhaustion and stress. "And Sarah," he added as she turned to leave, "thank you for that night. Your warning saved my life, but it also changed everything." As she prepared his drink, Sarah's hands trembled slightly. The weight of responsibility she had carried for months seemed to intensify with his presence. She had helped him escape, but she still didn't know what that escape had cost him or what dangers might follow him back to her establishment. Vincent's story, as it unfolded over several carefully orchestrated visits, revealed the dramatic consequences of that single moment of intervention. The federal raid had been the culmination of a 2-year investigation into his organization's activities. Wiretaps, financial surveillance, and insider informants had built a case that should have resulted in a life sentence. Sarah's warning had disrupted years of careful law enforcement work. After slipping out the back exit of Murphy's Bar, Vincent had made his way to a safe house his organization maintained for emergency situations. Within hours, he had activated escape protocols that had taken years to establish, involving false identities, offshore accounts, and transportation networks that operated outside normal channels. The federal agents had missed him by mere minutes, but those minutes had made all the difference. The escape hadn't been without cost. Vincent had been forced to abandon his legitimate businesses, his properties, and most of his accumulated wealth. More painfully, he had been separated from his family, including his teenage daughter who had been preparing for college and his aging mother who depended on his care. The man who had once commanded respect and fear now lived as a ghost, constantly moving to stay ahead of the ongoing investigation. Sarah learned these details gradually, during brief conversations that occurred when the bar was relatively empty. Vincent would appear unexpectedly, usually during afternoon hours when federal surveillance was less likely. Each visit revealed another piece of his story, painting a picture of a man whose entire world had been upended by circumstances beyond his control. The investigation into the failed raid had been thorough and unforgiving. Federal agents had interviewed every person present at Murphy's Bar that night, looking for evidence of who might have warned their target. Sarah had endured multiple interrogations, each more intense than the last, as investigators tried to break down her story and find inconsistencies in her account. Agent Patricia Morrison had been particularly persistent, returning to the bar weekly for the first month after the raid. She would order coffee and ask seemingly casual questions about the night's events, probing for details that might reveal how Vincent had learned about the impending arrest. Sarah had maintained her position of helpful ignorance, sticking to her story that she had noticed nothing unusual about any customer that evening. The pressure had been enormous. Federal investigators had made it clear that obstructing justice and aiding a fugitive carried serious penalties, including substantial prison time. They had hinted at plea agreements and threatened prosecution, but Sarah had never wavered from her account. Her neighborhood reputation for honesty actually worked in her favor, as investigators found it difficult to believe that such a respected community member would risk everything for a criminal. Vincent's organization had also faced devastating consequences. With their leader missing and federal pressure intensifying, the carefully maintained structure began to crumble. Associates were arrested, businesses were shut down, and territories were lost to rival groups who sensed weakness and opportunity. What had once been a powerful crime family was reduced to scattered remnants trying to survive in an increasingly hostile environment. The personal cost to Vincent became clearer during his visits to Murphy's Bar. He had aged years in just a few months, the stress of constant vigilance and separation from loved ones taking a visible toll. He spoke occasionally about missing his daughter's graduation, his mother's birthday, and the simple pleasures of a life lived without looking over his shoulder. "I wake up every morning wondering if today will be the day they find me," he confided during one particularly quiet afternoon. "Your warning gave me time to escape, but I'm not sure if what I'm living now can really be called freedom." Sarah found herself becoming an unwitting confidant to a man whose world had been shattered by the consequences of her split-second decision. She listened to his stories, offered what comfort she could, and gradually began to understand the complex web of relationships and obligations that had defined his previous life. Vincent wasn't just a criminal, he was a son, a father, and a community leader whose absence had created ripples affecting dozens of people. The neighborhood around Murphy's Bar had also changed in subtle ways. The sense of safety and stability that Vincent's presence had provided was gone, replaced by uncertainty and tension as various groups competed for influence. Small businesses that had enjoyed his protection now faced increased harassment and extortion from less disciplined criminal elements. Sarah witnessed these changes daily as regular customers shared their concerns and frustrations. The delicate balance that had maintained peace in their community had been disrupted, and no clear replacement had emerged. Some residents blamed federal law enforcement for destabilizing their neighborhood, while others argued that justice required such disruption regardless of the consequences. The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily on Sarah's conscience. She had acted to protect a human being from immediate danger, but her actions had also enabled someone who had undoubtedly caused harm to others. The federal investigation had been legitimate, seeking to hold accountable someone who had broken serious laws. Yet the man she saw now seemed broken by circumstances rather than evil in any traditional sense. During one particularly difficult conversation, Vincent revealed the extent of his fall from power. "I used to provide jobs for 200 people," he said quietly, staring into his whiskey. "Legitimate jobs in construction, restaurants, trucking companies. Those businesses are gone now, sold off or shut down. Those families lost their income because I couldn't be there to maintain what we had built." The weight of unintended consequences became clearer with each revelation. Sarah's moment of compassion had prevented one arrest but had triggered a cascade of events affecting countless lives. She began to understand why people spoke about the complexity of justice, the difficulty of knowing whether any single action was truly right or wrong. Vincent's visits became less frequent as months passed, the risk of detection growing with each appearance. He spoke of plans to leave the country permanently, to start over somewhere his past couldn't follow. The man who had once commanded a criminal empire was preparing to become a permanent exile, trading power and family for basic survival. On what would prove to be his final visit to Murphy's Bar, Vincent brought Sarah a small envelope. Inside was a letter and a substantial amount of cash, far more money than she had ever seen at one time. The letter was brief but heartfelt, expressing gratitude for her kindness and acknowledging the price she had paid for helping him. "This can't make up for the risk you took or the trouble you've endured," he said as she stared at the envelope. "But I wanted you to know that your courage that night meant everything to someone who had forgotten that strangers could still show mercy to people like me." Sarah tried to return the money, but Vincent was insistent. Use it for your family, for the bar, for whatever brings you happiness. Consider it a small payment for a debt I can never truly repay." His words carried the finality of someone saying goodbye forever. The investigation into Vincent Romano's escape eventually wound down as federal resources were redirected to other priorities. Agent Morrison made one final visit to Murphy's bar, informing Sarah that the case was being transferred to other agencies but warning that her actions that night would not be forgotten. The threat was implied but clear: any future contact with Vincent or his associates would be viewed with extreme suspicion. Sarah never saw Vincent again after that final evening, though she occasionally wondered about his fate. Had he successfully escaped to another country? Was he living safely under a new identity? Or had federal agents finally caught up with him despite her warning? The questions remained unanswered, part of the permanent uncertainty that her decision had created. The neighborhood around Murphy's bar gradually found its new equilibrium, though it never quite returned to its previous state. Sarah continued serving drinks and maintaining the establishment's reputation as a safe haven for local residents. The corner booth where Vincent had sat remained a reminder of the night when she had chosen loyalty over law, compassion over compliance. Regular customers sometimes asked about the federal raid, but Sarah had learned to deflect such questions with practiced ease. The story became part of the bar's unofficial legend, whispered about but never discussed openly. Everyone understood that some secrets were meant to be kept, that loyalty sometimes required silence even when the truth might be easier. Years later, Sarah would reflect on that rainy night and its aftermath with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She had acted according to her deepest values, choosing to protect someone who had shown her respect and kindness. Whether that choice had been morally correct remained an open question, one that she had learned to live with rather than resolve. The envelope Vincent had given her remained hidden in her apartment, its contents never spent. It served as a tangible reminder of the night when a simple bartender's warning had changed multiple lives forever. Sometimes she would take it out and reread his letter, remembering the gratitude in his eyes and the weight of consequences that had followed her moment of compassion. Murphy's bar stood as a testament to the complexity of human choices, where right and wrong intersected in ways that defied simple explanation. Sarah had honored the unwritten code of her establishment and her community, protecting a customer who had trusted her with his safety. The price of that decision continued to resonate through her life, a constant reminder that even small acts of kindness could have profound and lasting consequences. The story of the bartender's warning became part of neighborhood folklore, told in hushed tones and remembered as an example of loyalty in a world where such virtues were increasingly rare. Sarah had chosen to see Vincent Romano as a human being deserving of basic dignity rather than simply as a criminal deserving punishment. That choice had defined her character and shaped her understanding of justice in ways that would influence every future decision she made.